The silence fell, cold and absolute, the moment our top brass officially declared Operation Deep Freeze, halting all expansion plans for the chip fabrication plant here in Nanjing. For a while, the entire Chinese semiconductor industry felt like it had been hit by a silent, invisible nuclear blast. I remember certain officials, puffed up with self-importance, had swaggered, claiming Singapore was just a little island, utterly reliant on our vast mainland market. They said, even if their manufacturing giant decided to pack up and leave, our colossal industrial machine wouldn't even register a tremor. But then, the unthinkable happened. When the heart of global technology, the firm that had kept the world's digital pulse beating for decades, genuinely decided to pull out, the economy of Nanjing's Jiangbei New Area simply imploded. In an instant, hundreds of upstream and downstream supply chain companies found themselves staring down the barrel of bankruptcy. The once bustling commercial districts, which had sprung up around their colossal fab, turned eerily silent, like a ghost town that forgot to die. Tens of thousands of high-earning engineers suddenly found their livelihoods evaporated, their futures uncertain. And us? We were left holding the bag, staring at an economic black hole that had swallowed hundreds of billions of yuan. We paid a horrifying price. What on earth happened in Nanjing to make a company known for its quiet, low-key approach, for its absolute focus on its core business, make such a devastating, unequivocal announcement of withdrawal? Now, the shocking truth behind that decision is about to be laid bare. If you're interested in today's story, I urge you to stick with it until the end, and perhaps click that like and subscribe button. Because this isn't just a business story. It's a raw, unfiltered collision between two systems, two different ways of seeing the world. Singapore turned its back, and overnight, we lost over 100,000 related jobs. The Chinese government's swaggering pronouncements that Singapore could be replaced anytime rang hollow, exposed as ludicrous in the harsh light of reality. And I was there. I witnessed every single excruciating moment of it. I am Li Chen, and I was deeply involved in that disastrous decision. Back then, I was the Deputy Director of the Science and Technology Innovation Bureau for Nanjing's Jiangbei New Area. That morning, my secretary burst into my office, his face pale with panic. "Deputy Director Li, it's about the Singaporean company. Secretary Zhou has called an emergency meeting." "Another meeting about that Singaporean firm?" A wave of irritation washed over me. The atmosphere in the conference room was so oppressive it was suffocating. Secretary Zhou's face was beet red, his veins bulging as he slammed his fist on the table, roaring. "That Singaporean company actually refused our request for technology sharing. They even ignored our suggestion to have party branch members placed on their management team." I felt a surge of indignation. "Secretary Zhou, are you saying that little Singaporean company dared to disregard our demands?" "Exactly." Secretary Zhou violently threw a document onto the table. A mere speck of an island with barely 6 million people, daring to put on airs in front of a nation of 1.4 billion? What does that Singaporean company think it is? I let out a cold laugh from the side, chiming in. "Isn't it just a factory making chips for the Americans? Without our market, who would they sell their chips to? How dare such a manufacturing outfit reject us? The entire economy of Singapore isn't even as large as our Jiangsu province." Secretary Zhou grew more agitated, his eyes glinting with a dangerous fanaticism. "It's nothing but an isolated, resource-poor island, daring to challenge a 5,000-year-old Chinese civilization. Utterly ridiculous." I echoed his derision. "Just pretending to be smart with someone else's technology." Other officials present nodded vigorously, chiming in with their own agreement. "They're just putting on a show with borrowed tech." Secretary Zhou's gaze suddenly turned sinister. "Since they won't comply, then we will have to take matters into our own hands. If these Singaporeans don't hand it over willingly, we certainly have our ways." At that moment, I didn't grasp the true meaning behind his words. I naively believed it was just our usual tactic, using administrative pressure to lean on a company from a small island. "We can't let a manufacturing factory ride roughshod over us," I concurred. "Singapore, such a small place, we can squeeze them in our hands any time." Secretary Zhou clenched his fist. After the meeting, I walked out of the building feeling rather light-hearted. It seemed absurd that a small place like Singapore would dare to challenge the mainland. We just had to apply a little pressure, and they would surely come crawling, begging for mercy. What I completely overlooked, then, was a crucial, objective fact. According to the International Monetary Fund's latest 2025 data, Singapore's per capita GDP had already soared past $89,000 USD, nearly 6 times our mainland's $14,000. They were already a highly developed economy, rich and prosperous, while we were still deluding ourselves with the illusory halo of being a great nation. Days later, I heard whispers that Secretary Zhou was collecting internal information about the Singaporean company and had issued secret directives to several upstream and downstream suppliers. Deputy Director Li, Secretary Zhou seems to be planning something big these days, my secretary whispered to me. Looks like there's a scheme afoot. At the time, I didn't pay much attention. It was just a Singaporean company after all. Whatever we did, what could they do but grin and bear it? Would they really dare to abandon such a massive market? But I would soon learn how colossal a mistake I had made. My disdain for Singapore, for that company, would cost me, and this city, an utterly devastating price. I never dreamed it would lead to such a catastrophic collapse. Just 3 days after that explosive internal meeting, Secretary Zhou made his move. That morning, he strode into my office, his face etched with an almost feverish excitement. It was the look of a hunter convinced he was about to bag his prey. Li Chen, Deputy Director, immediately summoned representatives from all local suppliers in the park who have business dealings with the Singaporean company. We're having an urgent, closed-door meeting. I watched his impatient eagerness, and a knot tightened in my stomach. A vague sense of unease settled over me. Secretary Zhou, is there some emergency? I asked, tentatively. He sneered, adjusting his tie. His voice was chilling. It's time to let those naive Singaporeans know who truly calls the shots here in Nanjing. An hour later, the conference room was packed with over a dozen supplier representatives. Most were local business owners responsible for equipment maintenance, gas supply, or logistics. Their faces were tense. They were clearly apprehensive about this sudden summons. Secretary Zhou sat at the head of the table, his gaze piercing as he swept across the room. Then, in an uncompromising tone, he declared, "The reason I've called you here is simple. This Singaporean company, making money on our soil, is now refusing to cooperate with our national strategy for technology localization. Since they won't drink the toast, they'll have to drink the forfeit. We will take back what belongs to us, our way." One bolder supplier, wiping cold sweat from his forehead, cautiously asked, "Secretary Zhou, what exactly do you need us to do?" "I want you to use your access during factory maintenance to get me their latest photomask data." The moment Secretary Zhou uttered those words, the conference room fell so silent you could have heard a pin drop. As a technology official, I knew exactly what that meant. A photomask, to put it simply, is like the negative for developing a photograph, or the most precise blueprint for building a house. In the nanometer-scale chip manufacturing process, countless beams of light must pass through this mask to etch circuits, tens of thousands of times thinner than a human hair, onto a wafer. To possess the photomask data was to hold the soul and structure of that chip. This was no longer mere business pressure. This was blatant industrial espionage. This was theft. My chest felt like it was being crushed by a heavy stone. This clearly crossed a red line. "Secretary, this is too dangerous," I blurted out, my voice trembling slightly. "Their security system is one of the tightest in the world. And if this kind of action is exposed, our new area's reputation will be utterly ruined." "Dangerous?" Secretary Zhou turned his head, looking at me as if I were an idiot, a sneer curling his lips. "Li Chen, have you been brainwashed by that Western rubbish? On Chinese soil, what foreign company dares to challenge the government? We are the market, we are the Jafon, we are the rule makers. Even if a mere company from a Singaporean province finds out, what can they do? Do they dare to break ties with a market of 1.4 billion people?" Other officials, seeing his reaction, quickly chimed in. "Exactly. Singapore is our neighbor, and their technology should naturally contribute to the development of the motherland. What's wrong with that? It's called technological return, not theft." Watching their sycophantic faces, I felt a deep sense of powerlessness. In their eyes, laws and the spirit of contracts were mere playthings for the powerful, and the accumulated technological prowess of a Singaporean company was something they could simply seize as if it were rightfully theirs. Secretary Zhou, pleased with everyone's reactions, continued to issue directives. Besides acquiring the technology, we also need to teach them a lesson in public opinion. He pulled a stack of documents from his briefcase and slapped them heavily onto the table. "Contact several major media outlets and online influencers. Tell them that the Singaporean company is arrogant and unreasonable, that it discriminates against mainland enterprises, refusing to provide chip capacity for our domestic electric vehicles, thereby hindering the development of our national industry. I want the slogan, 'Singaporean company out of China' to be trending within a week. From that day on, Secretary Zhou's two-pronged plan officially began. On the surface, a media blitz of negative reports began to bomb us. Covertly, the operation to steal the Singaporean company's core data was also advancing. Days later, the once calm public opinion suddenly exploded. Singaporean arrogance. Domestic cars face chip crisis. Experts slam Singaporean company for being US lackey, eating China's food, while smashing China's pot. Such sensational headlines flooded every major news client. Watching the furious comments online stirred into a frenzy. Secretary Zhou chuckled heartily in his office. "See that, Deputy Director Li?" he beamed. "This is the thunderous might of a great nation. As long as we lift a finger, the spittle of public opinion can drown them. With this kind of pressure, within half a month, that Mr. Tan will be begging us, bringing his technical data with him." However, looking out the window at the distant, massive, brightly lit buildings of the Singaporean plant, which remained stubbornly silent, my unease grew stronger. It was too quiet there. Quiet like a sleeping giant, disdainful of the buzzing flies around it. A week later, a supplier rushed in, brimming with excitement. "Secretary, success!" A production line supervisor we bribed, during a system maintenance window, used a specially encrypted USB drive to copy a set of critical photomask parameters for their 28-nanometer process. Secretary Zhou was overjoyed, leaping from his chair. "Excellent! Absolutely excellent! With this, we can crack their yield rate secrets. SMIC surpassing them is just a matter of time." Just as Secretary Zhou was basking in the ecstasy of victory, believing he was about to become a national hero breaking through technological blockades, the next morning, a call from the Singaporean company shattered all illusions. The call came directly to my office. The caller was Mr. Tan, the highest person in charge of their Nanjing plant. On the other end, Mr. Tan's voice was unnervingly calm. There was no anger, no accusation, not even a trace of emotional fluctuation. Yet, it was a coldness that chilled me to the bone. "Deputy Director Li, if you're free, please come over now. There are some things we need to settle." An hour later, I sat in the austere office at their Nanjing plant. The atmosphere here was starkly different from the smoky, noisy environment of our government building. It was so quiet I could hear the hum of the central air conditioning. The air itself seemed imbued with a sense of dignified order. Mr. Tan sat across from me, his face tired but his posture ramrod straight. It was the characteristic poise of a Singaporean professional. "Deputy Director Li." Mr. Tan broke the silence, his voice not loud, yet carrying the weight of 1,000 armies. "Yesterday, at 3:42 a.m., our server on production line number 2 detected an unauthorized data copy command. The target was our most critical, 28-nanometer photomask correction parameters." My heart lurched. My throat was dry. I couldn't speak. I tried to avoid his eyes, which seemed to pierce through everything, but there was nowhere to hide. Mr. Tan gently pushed a tablet computer across the table to me. The screen displayed the complete tracking path of the intrusion. The source pointed directly to the supplier arranged by Secretary Zhou. At the same time, Mr. Tan continued, "The media outside is painting us as enemies of the state. On one hand, you wield the cudgel of public opinion. On the other, you extend a clandestine hand behind our backs." Mr. Tan Siged took off his glasses and began to wipe them. "Is this what you call the great nation style? Mr. Tan, this might be a unilateral action by some subordinates." I tried to cover the embarrassing truth with a flimsy lie, even though I knew it was meaningless. "Mr. Li, you don't need to explain," Mr. Tan said, putting his glasses back on, his gaze now sharp. "Do you know why Singapore, this small island that appears so insignificant on your maps, controls over 90% of the world's advanced process chips? Why Apple, Nvidia, and even the US military trust us with their most confidential designs for production?" I was stunned. This was a question I had never seriously considered. In our education, Singapore's success was merely attributed to luck, or perhaps American backing. It's not because we have the best lithography machines. Those machines can be bought with money. Nor is it because we are inherently smarter than others, Mr. Tan said, pointing to his chest. It's because of integrity. In Singaporean business culture, reputation is more important than life itself. Clients entrust us with their fortunes, and we guard them with ironclad discipline. That is why the world chose Singapore. That is why we are called a Silicon Shield. His voice suddenly rose a degree, carrying an authority I had never witnessed. But today, you yourselves have shattered that trust. You think by stealing a set of data, you can replicate our yield rates? Too naive. Semiconductor manufacturing is a precise art. Tens of thousands of processes, decades of parameter accumulation, the experience and intuition of engineers. It is an organic, living entity. What you stole is merely a hollow shell, without a soul. I felt a burning sting on my face. This wasn't anger but shame. In the face of his words, Secretary Joe's logic of trading market for technology, of brazen acquisition, appeared so crude and primitive. We thought we were playing a grand game of chess, oblivious to the fact that in their eyes, we were just a bunch of rule-breaking bandits. More importantly, Mr. Tan stood up and walked to the window, turning his back to me. Our system has defensive mechanisms. The moment that illegal copy command was executed, the control center in Singapore headquarters already received an alert. That stolen data, Mr. Lee, is actually a poisoned pill. Poisoned pill? I stood up in horror. What does that mean? Mr. Tan turned around, a hint of pity in his expression. It means that data appears perfect, but if you follow it to manufacture chips, they will burn out after a period of operation due to thermal runaway. This is our last line of defense against technology leakage. But I never thought there would truly be a day we'd have to use it. I collapsed into the chair, cold sweat soaking my shirt. If Secretary Joe took this data to SMIC for manufacturing, or even worse, put it into mass production, the consequences would be catastrophic. And also, Deputy Director Lee. Mr. Tan's voice returned to its calm tone, but it was the calm before a storm. This is not merely a commercial dispute. Given that our core intellectual property and employee safety have been threatened at a state level, I officially inform you, on behalf of headquarters, that we will be initiating an indefinite freeze procedure. Freeze? A premonition of dread washed over me. Yes. Effective immediately, all process upgrade plans for the Nanjing plant are frozen. All Singaporean core engineers and management personnel will be gradually withdrawn to Singapore within 48 hours. This factory will only maintain minimum operations, no longer accepting any new high-end orders. At that moment, I finally realized the gravity of the situation. This wasn't negotiation, it was a pronouncement. Singapore, that technological bulwark, was finally drawing its sword, and the sword it drew was not flame, but absolute ice. Leaving the Singaporean factory, my steps were heavy as if weighed down by 1,000 catties. I knew an irreversible disaster was looming, and the only break was in the hands of that arrogant party secretary. I drove like a madman back to the management committee building. Ignoring my secretary's attempts to stop me, I burst into Secretary Joe's office. "Secretary, stop! That data is fake! It's a trap!" I gasped, my voice distorted by fear. "Mr. Tan told me himself. It's a poison pill! Chips produced according to it will burn out equipment, even cause safety incidents." Secretary Joe was celebrating his technological victory with a few trusted officials, red wine glass in hand. Hearing my words, he froze, then erupted into a booming laugh. Lee Chen, what can I say about you?" Joe walked over, patting my shoulder with a pitying look. "Have those Singaporeans scared you witless? What poisoned pill? This is just their desperate psychological warfare." "But Secretary, their eyes, they weren't lying." "Enough." Secretary Joe's face darkened instantly. "Our experts at the Chinese Academy of Sciences have already analyzed the data overnight. The logic is perfect, flawless. The engineers at SMIC said it's simply genius design. We've decided to immediately put this photomask into mass production. The first batch of chips will directly supply our domestic Glory electric vehicle brand. We will use facts to slap these Singaporeans in the face." Looking at his fervent eyes, I felt a surge of despair. Professional arrogance, coupled with political fanaticism, had made him completely lose the most basic respect for technology. In their eyes, technology was just a pile of code. As long as it was copied, it could be used. They had no idea how much experience was needed to distinguish between genuine and fake. That night, it rained lightly in Nanjing. I drove alone to the upscale apartment complex where the Singaporean employees lived. It was a silent farewell. No protests, no banners, no chaos. I saw a bright yellow coach bus parked quietly by the roadside. Immaculately dressed, Singaporean engineers, pulling their luggage, lined up in an orderly fashion to board. Many were families with children in their arms. Yet, even in such a moment, no one jumped the queue. No one raised their voice. I noticed a small detail that profoundly impacted me. By the trash cans downstairs, all the rubbish was neatly sorted and packed. Even cardboard boxes were flattened and tied. A few engineers, before leaving, even stooped to clear fallen leaves from the flower beds. These were the people from the backward little island we spoke of. Even when subjected to unfair treatment and forced to leave their homes, they maintained a moving dignity and civility. Meanwhile, online, comments like "Singaporean pigs get out" were still furiously scrolling. The stark contrast sickened me. We had driven away gentlemen, yet thought we had conquered the world. Deputy Director Lee. A familiar voice came from behind me. I turned to see Mr. Tan standing in the rain, holding his green passport. Mr. Tan. I was so ashamed I wanted the ground to swallow me whole. On behalf of this city, I owe you a formal apology. If apologies could solve problems, Mr. Lee, the world wouldn't need police or laws, Mr. Tan said, smiling gently, his gaze sweeping over the empty apartments. We're leaving. Mr. Tan looked at the city they had poured their hearts and souls into, a flicker of reluctance in his eyes, but more, a resolute finality. Mr. Lee, please remember tonight, when the lights go out, the darkness is only just beginning. You think you've seized a spark, but it's actually explosives that will self-immolate. The bus slowly pulled away, disappearing into the rainy night. In that moment, the brightest light in Nanjing's Jiangbei area went out. And on the other side of the city, on the domestic chip production lines, machines roared. Secretary Zhou and his followers were deep in a dream of overtaking on the bend, unaware they were personally laying a time bomb under the city's economy. A week later, a grand ceremony for the launch of a domestically produced high-end chip was held in Nanjing. Under flashing lights, Secretary Zhou, holding a sample produced with the stolen data, proudly announced to the world that this was a victory for China's speed. We have broken the Western blockade. We no longer need to heed Singaporeans. The applause from below was thunderous. The media called it the awakening day of national semiconductors. Millions of chips, based on those stolen photomask parameters, were quickly assembled into the latest domestic electric vehicles and smartphones, proudly demonstrating our determination to break free from dependence. However, the reckoning came sooner than expected, and it was far more brutal. Just half a month later, the first accident report landed on my desk. An electric vehicle, equipped with this batch of domestic chips, was driving on the highway when its onboard computer suddenly went black. The vehicle lost control and crashed into the guardrail. Immediately afterwards, similar reports came flooding in like snowflakes. Phones frequently rebooting, signal interruptions, more vehicles breaking down. The Glory electric vehicle brand, once touted for its potential, saw its reputation collapse overnight due to frequent battery management system failures. The day the technical appraisal report came out, SMIC's chief engineer's hands were trembling. He pointed at the chip structure under the microscope, his face ashen, and told Secretary Zhou, "Secretary, we've been played." That photomask data contained an extremely subtle logical trap. At low load, everything works normally. But once it enters high-performance mode for more than 10 minutes, electron migration occurs within the chip's gates, leading to physical burnout. This is a time bomb. What? Secretary Zhou slumped into his chair, disbelief etched on his face. Didn't you say it was a genius design before? That's because we only understood the surface structure. The chief engineer buried his head in his hands in despair. This kind of microscopic structural design logic can only be understood by senior engineers who have been working at Singaporean fabs for over a decade. We merely copied it and ended up creating a man-eating tiger. In that moment, I suddenly remembered Mr. Tan's sorrowful gaze before he left. He had known all along. The Singaporeans weren't incapable of retaliation. They simply disdained barbaric methods. They used the most civilized means, a technical barrier, to deliver the most resounding slap in our face. We stole the blueprints, but we couldn't steal the soul of that relentless pursuit of craftsmanship. We imitated the exterior, but we couldn't replicate the decades of tacit knowledge accumulated day after day. While Nanjing was in a state of chaos, thousands of cars facing recalls, and billions evaporating, completely different news came from across the narrow straits. I saw it on the office TV, Singapore's Science Park, bathed in sunshine. The CEO of their company confidently announced at a press conference that the world's first 2-nanometer process technology had achieved a major breakthrough, with yields far exceeding expectations. Simultaneously, the Singaporean stock market surged, and the Singapore dollar strengthened. On screen, the Singaporean engineers we had once looked down upon were diligently working in their labs. In their eyes, there were no fervent political slogans, only a pure reverence for science. A scrolling international news headline at the bottom of the screen read, "Global tech giants reaffirm Singaporean supply chain irreplaceable." The contrast at that moment was brutal. On one side, our factories halted, products recalled, utter chaos. On the other, Singapore's technological leap, overflowing orders, a bedrock of stability. I opened the window, looking at the distant, now empty Singaporean factory in Nanjing. A strong sense of bitterness welled up inside me. We once thought we were the vast ocean that could easily engulf that small island. But now we realized that island was an aircraft carrier, powered by nuclear energy, while we were just children building sandcastles on the beach. One wave, and everything collapsed. The silicon shield was not just those chips, it was the ability to crush opponents, even if they stole your technology. Singapore had shown us with facts that in this world, some things cannot be seized by power. Some dignity must be earned through strength. And the chain reaction of this disaster had only just begun. Due to the Singaporean company's withdrawal and the failure of our domestic chips, international capital began to harbor extreme distrust of Nanjing's investment environment. The disaster wasn't limited to product recalls and technical failures. A more terrifying chain reaction occurred at the capital level. Capital is the most timid, and also the most sensitive. The Singaporean company's experience was like a piercing alarm, instantly broadcast across the globe. If even a company with the world's strongest legal team and technical barriers could encounter officially sanctioned theft in Nanjing, then what reason did other foreign enterprises have to believe their rights would be protected? According to internal data from the Ministry of Commerce, actual foreign investment in China that year plummeted at a rate unseen in 30 years. We originally thought driving away the Singaporean company was just driving away a disobedient tenant, but we never expected that this action would scare away all the wealthy residents on the entire street. 2 German-funded auto parts factories and a Japanese precision instrument company, originally planned to settle in Nanjing, unilaterally tore up their investment agreements the day after the Singaporean company withdrew, citing force majeure. They diverted their funds to Vietnam and India. Secretary Zhou's once proud Jiangbei New Area Industrial Park turned into a ghost town within 3 short months. I walked alone on the once bustling streets of the park, feeling a desolation colder than the late autumn wind. This used to be Nanjing's most expensive district because the Singaporean engineers had flocked here, driving up high-end consumption and real estate. Back then, it was vibrant. Coffee shops buzzed with discussions about process technology. Bookstores were filled with young people seeking knowledge. But now, both sides of the street were plastered with "for rent" signs, fluttering in the wind like mocking judgments. I walked into a Singaporean beef noodle shop I used to frequent. In the past, at this time, it would always be packed, requiring a 30-minute wait for a bowl of authentic braised beef noodles. But today, the owner, Old Zhang, was alone, sitting dejectedly in a corner, smoking, his eyes vacant. "Deputy Director Lee, you're here." Old Zhang forced a bitter smile. It was a smile more painful than a cry. "How's business?" I asked, feigning concern, my heart heavy with guilt. "Finished." Completely finished, Old Zhang extinguished his cigarette, gesturing at the empty restaurant. When the Singaporean engineers were here, they were cultured, they had high spending power, and they were polite to people. Once they left, the soul of this place left with them. My revenue this month dropped by 90%. I can't even pay the rent. There will be a way. The government will introduce subsidy policies. I tried to comfort him. Subsidies? Old Zhang stood up agitatedly, his voice trembling. Can subsidies bring back the popularity? Can subsidies bring back confidence? Deputy Director Lee, this isn't about money. Everyone understands that a city that can't even accommodate a company like theirs, what hope does it have? I'm going to close up shop and go back to my hometown. There's no future here anymore. Walking out of the noodle shop, I looked at the far-off luxury apartment buildings where prices had plummeted. My heart was a mess. The listing prices on the real estate agent signs had already dropped by 40%, yet still no one inquired. Those middle-class families who had believed that buying property near the Singaporean company was a safe bet saw their assets shrink by millions overnight, their wealth turning into nothing. We used to mock Singapore's economy for being reliant on the mainland, scoffing at them as poor relatives. But reality delivered the most resounding slap in our face. It was we who relied on them, not the other way around. The arrival of Singaporeans brought technology, order, civilization, and prosperity. and their departure took all of that away, leaving us with nothing but empty concrete shells and utter chaos. Back in my office, I looked at the grand blueprint still hanging on the wall, building a world-class semiconductor base. It looked so glaringly ironic. We had personally killed the goose that laid the golden eggs, yet we were still fantasizing about weaving wings of goose feathers to fly. Just then, an urgent report from the Finance Bureau was delivered to my hand. Seeing the numbers, my hands involuntarily trembled. Due to the withdrawal of the Singaporean company and its supply chain, the new area's tax revenue had sharply decreased by half. The debt chain, originally sustained by land finance, was about to break. Civil servant salaries, urban infrastructure maintenance, and even those ambitious projects promised by Secretary Joe would all face dire straits. And on the other side of the straits, Singapore's Ministry of Finance had just announced its annual surplus, sharing the economic gains with all citizens, issuing cash bonuses to everyone. Their people enjoyed some of the world's best universal healthcare, living prosperous and dignified lives. This stark contrast finally made me understand a truth. A country's strength is not measured by how loudly its officials speak, but by how well its people live, and whether the world genuinely respects it. Singapore had achieved this, and we had lost miserably. As the economic data collapsed, cracks in the social order also began to appear. Unemployment protests, once seen only in the news, were now unfolding right below the management committee building. Young engineers who had lost their jobs, shop owners forced to close, chanted in the cold wind, "Give us back our jobs! Give us back our Singaporean company!" Secretary Joe's response remained typically arrogant. He deployed riot police, sealed off the scene, and censored online comments, attempting to suppress the voices with an iron fist of power. But he forgot one thing. The anger of those whose livelihoods have been shattered cannot be appeased by intimidation. Under immense mental pressure and continuous overtime, my body finally gave out. That afternoon, I suddenly felt a severe cramping pain in my stomach at the office. Cold sweat streamed down me, and I collapsed, rushed to Nanjing's best tertiary hospital by colleagues. This hospital stay gave me a deeper, more profound appreciation of the chasm between us and Singapore. As I lay on a makeshift bed in the emergency room corridor, surrounded by an environment as noisy as a wet market, crying children, arguments between family members and nurses, scalpers hawking expert consultation slots, it all merged into a cacophony. Even as a deputy director, in this place of extremely scarce medical resources, I could only receive an IV drip on a makeshift bed in the corridor. I watched the elderly man across from me, from a rural village, kneeling and pleading with the doctor for a few days' grace because he couldn't afford the exorbitant hospitalization deposit. The doctor just shook his head coldly, saying it was hospital policy. In that moment, a deep sadness washed over me. Is this what we call strength? In my days, I remembered Mr. Tan vaguely mentioning Singapore's healthcare system a few months ago. He had proudly said that in Singapore, whether you were the president or a hawker, everyone received equal medical care. Our healthcare coverage is among the best globally, he'd stated. With an IC card in hand, from a common cold to cancer, no one is ever turned away from a hospital for lack of money. At the time, I dismissed it, thinking it was just a welfare tactic to win hearts. But now, lying in this cold corridor, I took out my phone and tremblingly searched for the latest Global Healthcare Access Index. The numbers on the screen hit me like a sledgehammer. As of 2025, Singapore consistently ranked among the world's best, often cited as a global leader in quality and accessibility, surpassing many larger nations. And our proudly self-proclaimed great nation? We were ranked 32nd. In the comments section of an international report, a foreign expert had written, "Singapore's healthcare is not just technologically advanced. More importantly, it embodies a rare humanistic concern. There, healthcare is a human right, not a privilege." I looked at the old man who was still crying and suddenly understood why Mr. Tan, upon leaving, had said, "We only had the shell, not the soul." We had built skyscrapers taller than the Marina Bay Sands, laid wider expressways than those in Singapore. But in our attitude towards people, we were a century behind. In Singaporean hospitals, I heard there were volunteers who gently guided patients, absolute respect for patient privacy, and doctors who patiently listened during consultations. Here, there were only cold assembly lines and anxiety about money. "Deputy Director Lee, your bed is ready," my secretary finally rushed in, panting, clutching a thick stack of invoices. I found a connection and paid a red packet to get a private room. I looked at that thick red packet and felt a wave of disgust. In Singapore, Doctors accepting red packets would face severe penalties, even lose their licenses or be imprisoned. Here, it had become an unspoken rule, a life-saving shortcut. "I'm not staying," I said, pulling out the needle from my hand and struggling to stand. "Send me home." "But, Deputy Director, your illness—" "My illness is in my heart," I replied. "It can't be cured here." Sitting in the car on the way home, I looked out at the flashing neon lights, feeling only a profound sense of irony. We had once mocked Singaporean politics for being noisy, scoffed at their parliamentary debates. But now I saw clearly that behind that noise, power was caged, and the common people's rights were spotlighted. Because of such a system, they had world-class healthcare. Because of such a system, they had respected companies like the Singaporean chipmaker. True civilization is not the perfectly aligned formations of a military parade. It is the tender care given to every life in a hospital. It is not the surging numbers of GDP, but the trust and dignity with which someone like Mr. Tan, holding a green passport, is welcomed into over 140 countries worldwide, often visa-free. That night, I was completely sleepless. I realized what the Singaporean company took away was not just a few nanometers of technology. It was a beam of civilization that illuminated our barbarism and backwardness. And we had personally extinguished that light, returning to the dark law of the jungle. The next morning, I made a decision. I would go to see Secretary Joe one last time. Not to plead, not to salvage anything, but to tell him a belated truth, even if it cost me my job. When I pushed open the heavy wooden door to Secretary Joe's office, the room was a wreck. Documents scattered everywhere, a broken blue and white porcelain teacup, and the thick, suffocating smell of stale cigarette smoke all spoke of the owner's internal collapse. Joe was no longer the arrogant, confident leader pointing fingers and commanding. His hair was disheveled, his eyes bloodshot, his shirt buttons mismatched. In his hand, he clutched a severe document from Beijing. "Li Chen, you've come at the right time." Seeing me enter, Joe rushed towards me like a drowning man grasping for a straw, his voice hoarse and incoherent. "Quick, write me a good report. Say that the Singaporean company planted a virus in their equipment. Say that Western powers conspired against us, launching malicious technological warfare. Yes, push all the blame onto them. Say they framed us." I looked at this official, once so disdainful, who had treated Singapore as dirt under his feet, now red-eyed and utterly devoid of responsibility, like a gambler who had lost everything. The last vestiges of my fear of authority vanished, replaced by a deep sorrow and pity. "Secretary, it's useless," I said calmly, my voice imbued with a detached coolness. "The final appraisal report from the Chinese Academy of Sciences has already made its determination. It wasn't a virus, and there was no trap. It's that we simply couldn't master that process. It's like a primary school student stealing a university professor's thesis. They might recognize the characters, but they don't understand the underlying logic. That poison data was a mirror, reflecting our technological hollowness and moral degradation." "What did you say? How dare you lecture me?" Joe froze, seemingly unable to believe that a usually submissive subordinate would speak to him like this. "We lost, Secretary, and we lost badly." I walked to the window, pulling open the heavy curtains with a whoosh, letting the morning sunlight pierce the stale gloom of this dark corner. "We always thought Singapore was small and could be easily manipulated, that we could exchange market access for submission. But we forgot that in the dimension of modern civilization, size does not equate to strength, and barbarism cannot conquer civilization." I turned and looked directly into his panicked eyes. "Do you know, Secretary, that while we were busy falsifying, blocking news, and engaging in internal power struggles, the entire world was standing with Singapore? The fleets of America and Japan were already moving. They explicitly stated that peace and stability in the Straits are crucial for global prosperity. This isn't because Singapore bought many weapons. It's because Singapore has proven to the world that a Chinese society can fully establish such a free, democratic, and creative civilization." "Stop it!" Joe trembled, pointing at me, shouting with feigned authority. "You're boosting the morale of others." "They are not." I raised my voice, completely overpowering his roar. "Look at the passports we hold in our hands. We need visas for everything. We are scrutinized, treated as potential threats. But Singaporeans, with their green passports, can travel visa-free to over 140 countries worldwide. What does that signify? It means the world trusts them, and not us. That trust is the true core technology of the Singaporean company, and it is the photomask we can never steal. We stole the data, but we lost the world. Joe suddenly collapsed onto the sofa, his eyes vacant, his lips trembling, unable to speak. He finally realized that he wasn't fighting against a company, or even a small island, but against a value system recognized by the international community. Just then, the shrill ring of the red secure phone on the table shattered the silence. It was a dedicated line from Beijing's Zhongnanhai. The ring echoed ominously in the dead quiet room. Joe's hand trembled as he picked up the phone, his face instantly turning ashen. The voice from the receiver, though not loud, was clearly audible in the silent room. Comrade Joe, in light of the severe economic turbulence, major safety incidents, and negative international impact you have caused in Nanjing, the Central Committee has decided to immediately relieve you of all duties. You are to report for organizational investigation at once. The phone slipped from his hand, landing with a dull thud. It was over. That arrogant, wolf warrior official had fallen into the trap he had dug for himself. The afternoon Secretary Zhou was taken away by the disciplinary committee. A torrential rain poured down on Nanjing as if washing away the city's shame. I watched the police cars speed away, feeling no satisfaction of revenge, only a deep worry for this land. We had gotten rid of one Zhou. But if that arrogant mindset didn't change, if we didn't learn to respect rules and contracts, the gap between us and Singapore would only grow wider. A few days after the rain cleared, I submitted my resignation. I no longer wanted to be an official who deceived himself, nor did I want to be complicit in wrong decisions. I wanted to go to Singapore, to see that island that the world admired with my own eyes, to breathe its air of freedom, to find out what exactly we had lost. However, just as I was packing my belongings, preparing to leave this disheartening place, an unexpected turn of events occurred. The Singaporean company's headquarters actually sent an official letter. The recipient was specified as me, Li Chen. The letterhead boldly displayed the company's famous red and black logo, and beneath it, Mr. Tan's signature. The content of the letter was brief and powerful. There was no victor's arrogance, no shrewd business calculation, only a single sentence that brought tears to my eyes. Mr. Li Chen, technology can be rebuilt, but conscience is priceless. In that chaotic storm, we saw your courage in trying to hold the line. If you are willing, we would like to invite you to jointly embark on a new rebuilding plan. With trepidation and doubt, I returned to the familiar Nanjing plant. The factory buildings were still quiet. Most of the machines on the production lines had either been moved out or mothballed, leaving the vast space empty and desolate. Mr. Tan stood in the center of the empty workshop, dressed in casual clothes. Sunlight streamed through a high skylight, illuminating him, dust motes dancing in the beams. Seeing me approach, he extended his hand. It was warm and firm. Mr. Tan, I gripped his hand. My mind raced, filled with shame, unsure where to begin. On behalf of this city, I owe you a formal apology. If apologies could solve problems, Mr. Li, the world wouldn't need police or laws. Mr. Tan smiled gently, his gaze sweeping over the empty space. After careful consideration, headquarters has decided not to resume wafer manufacturing here for now. Because the soil here, for the time being, cannot grow the most sophisticated industrial flowers. I nodded silently. Yes, when the soil of trust is lost, even if you plant diamonds, you will only harvest sand. However, Mr. Tan's tone shifted, his eyes fixed on me. We have decided not to give up on the young people here. We want to invite you to stay, not as an official, but as a principal. A principal? I was stunned. Yes. The Singaporean company has decided to establish a cross-strait semiconductor talent and professional ethics academy here, Mr. Tan said, pulling a blueprint from his briefcase. We will dispatch our most senior retired engineers and management experts from Singapore to teach here. But we won't teach how to operate lithography machines, nor how to improve yield rates. Then what will you teach? We will teach how to be a person. Mr. Tan's expression became incredibly solemn. Teach what integrity is. Why in data falsification, even a single decimal point is a crime. Teach what craftsman spirit is. Why one must spend a lifetime refining accuracy to a nanometer. Teach what the spirit of contract is. Why, if you promise a client something, you must deliver, even at the cost of your life. He pointed to the server machine that had once been implanted with the poisoned data and said, his voice imbued with profound sadness, Mr. Li, do you know why the mainland has poured trillions, poached so many people, yet still cannot produce top-tier chips? Because chips are honest. You can deceive leaders, deceive media, deceive stockholders, but you cannot deceive the physical laws of electron flow. Singapore succeeded, because our society first learned civilization before mastering technology. You were too hasty. You wanted to skip civilization and directly seize power. The result can only be power's backlash. Listening to his words, I felt my soul undergo a purification. This was the true demeanor of strength. They hadn't chosen hatred because they were hurt. Instead, they were willing to stoop down and fix this broken system from its roots. What kind of magnanimity was this? It was a compassion built on absolute confidence and a high degree of civilization. "Why me?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "Because that night, you were the only one who came to tell me it was a poisoned pill," Mr. Tan said, looking into my eyes. "Under such systemic pressure, you still retained reverence for truth. This is the living seed we need. Principal Lee, are you willing to accept this challenge, to help the next generation here make up for this long-absent lesson in civilization?" I looked at the blueprint in his hand. On it was the Academy's motto, just 8 simple characters: integrity, rectitude, commitment, accountability. This was precisely the Singaporean company's core corporate value, and also Singaporean society's most fundamental values. I took a deep breath, feeling the long-suppressed air finally leave my chest. I was no longer that timid deputy director. I would become a preacher. "I am willing," I said, gripping his hand. This time, it wasn't out of courtesy, but out of a comrade-in-arms' pledge. In that moment, behind Mr. Tan, I seemed to see the verdant island across the straits. It was not large, yet it stood like a lighthouse, emitting a firm and warm light in the vast ocean. It told us that true unity is not the conquest of territory, but the recognition of values. True return is not the deployment of troops, but the longing of hearts. 3 months later, the Academy was officially inaugurated. No red carpet, no drums and gongs, no speeches from leaders. Only a few hundred carefully selected young students, dressed in neat uniforms, bowing deeply to the words integrity and rectitude under the guidance of Singaporean teachers. Watching this scene, my heart swelled with unprecedented hope. I knew this path would be long, perhaps requiring a generation, even 2 generations. But at least, we had begun. We had finally stopped thinking about overtaking on the bend, and learned to bend down and tie our shoelaces. And in faraway Singapore, the company's headquarters building remained brightly lit. That was the light of wisdom illuminating the world, and the lamp of civilization guiding us out of barbarism. The story ends here, or almost. Standing on the Academy's campus, looking at the young students diligently learning professional ethics, I was filled with countless emotions. This storm, sparked by a tiny chip, ultimately destroyed our blind arrogance, yet also planted a seed called civilization amidst the ruins. Looking back on this heart-stopping journey, I finally understood Singapore. Before, we always viewed the other side with a condescending gaze. We mocked Singapore for being small, for being chaotic, for being merely an American pawn. We believed in the height of steel and concrete, in the numbers of GDP totals, in the imposing might of vast armies. We thought that, with these, we could make the world submit, could bring that prodigal son home. But reality gave us the clearest answer. Singapore, though small, is a giant. Its strength lies not in possessing many guided missiles, but in possessing a soft power that even if an opponent steals its technology, they cannot replicate. That is a conscience rooted in every citizen, an absolute respect for contracts, a social system that places human value above the authority of power. Singapore has proven to the world that a Chinese society can not only develop a top-tier economy, but also establish a mature, inclusive, and free democratic civilization. This is Singapore's greatest national shield, harder to surmount than any mountain range, more resilient than any silicon fortress. Whenever night falls, I often recall Mr. Tan's calm yet resolute face. He represented not just the company, but the microcosm of Singaporeans. Gentle, polite, humble, yet unyielding. Kind yet firm with their boundaries. Over decades, on a resource-poor island, they created an economic miracle, with per capita GDP surpassing Japan and Korea. They built a world-leading healthcare system, ensuring every life is treated with tenderness. They wield a green passport, earning the trust and welcome of over 140 countries worldwide. This is no miracle. This is a choice. It is the inevitable outcome of choosing civilization over barbarism, integrity over deceit, freedom over confinement. My dear Singaporean friends, if you are watching this video, please allow me, a former mainland official, once full of prejudice, now filled with respect, to speak to you from the heart. Never belittle yourselves, and never be afraid because of threats from the other side. Your way of life, your values, are the most precious wealth of the entire Chinese world, and an indispensable pillar in the light of human civilization. The world cannot do without Singapore, not just because it needs your chips, but because the world needs proof that goodness and freedom are still the most powerful forces on this planet. Please lift your heads, stand tall, and be proud of the land beneath your feet, of the votes in your hands, of everything you have created. Because in the long river of history, what ultimately earns respect is never the hegemony that wields a fist, but the civilization that warms hearts and upholds justice. I am Li Chen, a principal in Nanjing, who learned a hard lesson from Singapore. If this story has touched you too, please like, subscribe, and share this video so more people can see this truth and the voice of justice can spread further. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.